What?
Figure out what's wrong with it and then correct it.
Yes. So 23, there is an error in how they factored it. And you have to identify the error and then correct it. And the biggest thing I'd say is go on and do the greatest common factor and compare it to it. And that should kind of give you the idea of where it's at. Because there's an issue with the greatest common factor or how they factored the greatest common factor out. So give that a shot. If you still have questions, we can cover that. All right? Any other questions on the homework? All right. Today we're covering 3.13. This is the last part of 3.1 that we're going to look at. And the first thing we're going to look at is something called the zero product property. Yes. This is the notes. So, zero product property, in words, if the product of two expressions is 0, then one or both of them is equal to 0. Well, all it's saying, zero product, if I multiply two things together and they equal 0, well, what's the only way I can multiply two things together to get 0? One of them has to be 0. If we multiply two things together, if we multiply with 0, the whole thing becomes 0. So if I'm multiplying two things, A and B, and it tells me 0, it's either A is 0 or B is 0. One of them has to be 0. That's just how the zero product property works. Now, it doesn't have to be two things. We can have two or more things. As long as we have a product of multiple things, two or more things being multiplied together and it equals 0, one of them has to be 0. That's the only way this works. So now the question is, why is this connected with what we've been doing? Well, when we factor something, we get two things being multiplied together. When we solve by factoring, we're wanting to get it into its factors. Our sets of parentheses being multiplied together, and it's equal to 0. Because all it's telling us is that here, these two things are being multiplied together. K plus 1 times K minus 5 is equal to 0. Now, according to the zero product property, either K plus 1 is 0 or K minus 5 is 0. So if we're multiplying those two together, one of those has to be 0. Questions on this here? So if we're solving this, solving by the zero product property, well, we have two things being multiplied together equals 0. So one of them has to be 0. Solve for K. So K plus 1 equals 0. If we're solving this for K, we would subtract 1 from both sides. Because our plus 1 minus 1 is 0, leaving us with K is equal to -1. So one of the solutions for this is -1. Here, we'd add 5 to both sides, telling us K is equal to 5. So questions on this so far? Do we feel good with this here? Zero product property and using this? Well, let's look at the next one. So this here, again, we have two things being multiplied together that equal 0, so one of them must be 0. So that's telling us that either 2m plus 3 is equal to 0, or 4m plus 3 is equal to 0. We have one of these two statements, and again, we just need to solve. We can start with the one on the left, 2m plus 3. So we would subtract 3, minus 3 from both sides to get m by itself, telling us that 2m is equal to -3. Then we divide both sides by 2, telling us m is -3/2. That's all we have to do for that one there. The other one, 4m plus 3 equals 0. First thing we can do is subtract 3 again, telling us 4m is equal to negative 3. Then we would divide by 4, telling us m is equal to negative 3/4. Neither one of these simplify, so they're just negative 3/2 and negative 3/4. And that's it. Questions on this here? Now, if we wanted to check and make sure that these work, all we would do is take those values of m and plug them back into the original function. So negative 3/2, 2m plus 3, I'm going to grab a note sheet. Otherwise, I'm having to flip back between them. And we could check it in a calculator. We don't have to necessarily do this by hand. Yes, parentheses. We'd have 2 times negative 3/2 plus 3 times 4 times our negative 3/2 plus 3. So all I've done is just type the negative 3/2 in for x. And what value should we get for this here? 0. It tells us it is 0. So that is the correct answer. We could do the same thing with our negative 4, not negative 4/3. It would be negative 3/4 plus 3 times 4 times negative 3/4. And this also gives us 0. It gives us exactly what we wanted. So questions on the first two? All right, we ready for problem number 3? X squared plus 10x plus 21. Do we have two things being multiplied together that equal 0? We don't. But we can, because when we factor x squared plus 10x plus 21, it turns it into two things being multiplied together, or two sets of parentheses. So to solve by factoring, the first thing we need to do is, one, get it equal to 0, and then factor. So if we look at this here, x squared plus 10x plus 21, we're going to factor it, and we can because it is equal to 0. Is there a greatest common factor between these three terms? Well, 1, but that's the only thing. So we can move to step number 2. Our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. So we are factoring the left side, and it's still going to be equal to 0. Let's find the signs. Since the third term is positive, our signs are the same, and that's the sign of the middle term. If our third term is negative, our signs are opposite. So for this one here, is the third term positive? Well, yes. So the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term, which is also positive. So we have plus and plus. Factors of the first and third term. Factors of our first term, we're looking at the factors of x squared, which is just x and x. Factors of 21. We have 1 and 21, 3 and 7, and that's it. Which one? 3 and 7. We can try it first. Now we'll still, even though we're solving, it's still going to be good to check and make sure we factored it correctly. And when we check, I would make sure to write the check. You can do it to the right or left of it. I wouldn't do it underneath it. Because when we check this here, we're checking to make sure that it is the correct factors, yes? Is that the end of this problem? Well, no, we're going to still have to solve it just like we did the previous two. So we want to do the check off to the side. Our x times 7 is 7x. 3 times x is 3x. And it gives us a positive 10x. Pretty much, yeah. Since we factored it, we did turn it into two things being multiplied together that equal 0, yes? All right. That means we can solve this here. And since we do have two things multiplied together equals 0, it means that either x plus 3 is 0 or x plus 7 is equal to 0. And if we solve the one on the left, our x plus 3 equals 0, getting x by itself, first thing we would do is subtract 3. X is equal to negative 3. Our other one, x plus 7 equals 0, we would subtract 7, telling us x is equal to. And that's it. Questions on this here? Questions on anything we've done so far? All right, we ready for the next one? How do we feel about these so far? Feel pretty good? Because most all of this revolves around what? Factoring. Because if we can get it factored, set them equal to 0, solve. In a lot of our higher order equations, if we start getting x squared, x cubed, x to the fourth, we really need it equal to 0 to start. Because there's very few that we don't. We're ready for the next one. Okay. All right. This one here, the equation is equal to 0, so we can start our factoring. Is there a greatest common factor between these three terms, or really four? Well, yeah, three terms. 4. So we can factor it out. And if we factor 4 out of 4x squared, we're left with x squared. 4 factored out of 20x is 5x minus 6. So now that we have the greatest common factor, we'll have our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Here the third term is, our signs are opposite. One's positive, one's negative. Questions on this so far? Factors of x squared and x. Factors of 6. Which one do we want to try first? So I think we were kind of mixed on 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. 1 and 6. Okay. 1 first, 6 second. And then we're going to check it. X times negative 6. Negative 6x. 1 times x is plus x, giving us negative 5x. Is that the middle term we wanted?
Oh no.
We needed positive, not negative. So that's an easy fix. All we've got to do is switch the signs. If we get the correct number but wrong sign, we just have to change the signs. Because now, if we double check, x times 6 is positive 6x. Negative 1 times x is negative x, giving us the positive 5x.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I accidentally just wrote things wrong.
Okay. Questions on how we got to this point here? So again, we said 0 product. 2 or more things multiplied together equal 0. One of them must be 0, yes? So we know that x minus 1 will be 0. X plus 6 will be 0, yes? What about the 4? Can I do anything to 4? It's being multiplied by the other, yes? There's no variable with it. So it's just 4. It's just there. It's a scalar. It's making the other numbers bigger or smaller. I can't do anything with it. So at this point, it doesn't matter. It's just there because we're saying, really, I have 4 times an amount times another amount equals 0. The two that I can, x minus 1 and x plus 6, are the ones that can be 0. I can't change the 4 without changing the problem. Because the main ones we're focused on are x minus 1 and x plus 6. Now we can solve these two here. To solve x minus 1, we would add 1 to both sides, telling us x is equal to 1. X plus 6, we would subtract 6 from both sides, telling us x is equal to negative 6.
This is like super easy.
I'm glad. Now, if we wanted to check it and make sure we got it right, so we could do 4 times 1 squared plus 20 times 1 minus 24. We can plug our solutions back in for x and see if they do give us 0. I think it was, negative 6 squared plus 20 times negative 6 minus 24. And it also gives us 0. Questions on this here? Are we ready for the next one? We haven't seen one like this yet. But what's different? There's not 3 numbers. We're missing which one? The one with just n, the one in the middle, yes? There is one. It's just 0 n.
3 times 0.
So really we can say it's 3n squared plus 0n minus 75 is equal to 0. Yeah. We just don't have a middle term. Now we can still factor even without that there. Because if we look at this here, 3n squared minus 75, is there a greatest common factor between 3 and 75? Is there a number that goes into both? Is 75 divisible by 3? So we can factor a 3 out of both terms. So if we factor a 3 out, we're left with n squared minus 25. So 75 divided by 3. So we factored the 3 out. So we divided it out of 3n squared. So the question is where we got the 25 from. So when we factored 3 out, we divided each of these terms by 3. 3n squared divided by 3 is n squared. 75 divided by 3 is 25. Yes. Now the first and third kind of it doesn't seem as first and third, but our n squared is still the first, 25 is still the third. So when we find the signs, 25 is our third term, and the sign is negative. That means our signs in the parentheses are opposite. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. Now we can still go to our next step, factors of the first term. Well, the only factors of n squared are n and n. Factors of 25. 1 and 25,
4 and 5.
5 and 5. Which one of these sets of factors do we want to try? 5 and 5. Now let's check and see what we get for the middle term. N times negative 5 is negative 5n. 5 times n is. So even though there is no middle term, we can still factor it. Negative 5n plus 5n is 0, just like we wanted. 0n. Questions on how we got to this point here? We have two or more things multiplied together to equal 0, so one of these must be 0. So n plus 5 equals 0. Well, subtract 5 from both sides. N equals negative 5. Questions on this here? Okay. Okay. How do we feel about everything we've done so far? So with all these types, do we feel comfortable with this? Do we need to see another example of one of those? So that's where we're headed to next, is let's look at number 8. Because number 8 looks a little different, yes?
Let me look. That's not a 0. Yes.
So it's not equal to 0. So the first step we do is not factoring, but we need to get this equal to.
This is due 29. Bro, I'm pretty sure you on first.
So if it's not equal to 0, we need to get it equal to 0. So here we added 9p because negative 9p plus 9p is indeed 0. Now since 9p is not a like term with our 3p squared or negative 120, we just kind of put it with the rest. And when we do move it over, I would make sure that it's in standard form. Standard form is, so p squared, p number. So it's pretty much descending power from left to right. And if we do have multiple variables, they are always in alphabetical order based off of powers. Now we can factor. Is there a greatest common factor between 3p squared, 9p, and 120? So
It'd be 40 because 12, 3 times 4 is
3 times 4 is 12. And to get to 120, well, that's just 3 times 40. So they are all divisible by 3. And if we factor it out, we get p squared plus 3p minus 40 is equal to 0. Now we can factor our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Our third term is positive or negative? Third term is negative. So our signs are opposite. One's positive, one is negative. Let's start with the factors of the first term. Factors of p squared would be p and p. Factors of 40. 1 and 40. 2 and 20. 5 and 8. And that's it. 3 is not a factor because divisibility of 3, if the digits of the number add up to be a number divisible by 3, then it is also. 4 plus 0 is 4. 4 does not divide by 3 evenly.
I used 5 and 8.
So, and yes,
Looks right one, because I want to guess on 68.
it is 5 and 8. We would need to switch the signs. Because 5 and 8 would be the last one. The only two other numbers after 5 that could work are 6 and 7. 6 only works as a factor if both 2 and 3 do. 3 didn't work, so 6 is not going to work. And 7 is main. There are tricks to it, but you can use a calculator just as fast as the trick. And if I do check this, p times 8 is 8p. Negative 5 times p is negative 5p, giving us positive 3p. So those are the two correct sets of factors, telling us that p minus 5 is equal to 0 and p plus 8 is equal to 0. For our p minus 5, we would add 5. Welcome. Questions on this here? Questions on anything we've done so far? We feel good with these so far. You all need to see another example of one of these. So look at the last few, see if any of those look specifically challenging. Okay. Do we feel good with? I don't need that many. So your homework is a worksheet. Yes. Oh, thank you. So you can go for 1 and 2, you can go straight to a plus 1, a plus 2 equals 0, go from there. Or, if you see what the solutions are, that's fine too.